COVID and inflation has caused the bourbon barrel market prices to skyrocket, which has resulted in high bottle prices, and there's a lot of evidence that the barrel market's going to collapse. And that's going to cause a lot of turmoil that's going to shift the landscape for consumers. And if you want to hear about it, then stick around. Before we get started, pretty girl, we have to thank the patrons. Yep. So if you don't know, we have a Patreon account where individuals can sign up and support us with a monthly donation. We're going to talk more about how you can get involved with that later on. But we would like to say that everyone's name that's on the screen right now is contributing at our top 3 levels. And we have to just thank them so much. Without them, we would not be able to produce this content for you all. Now, let's get into some disclaimers. So no one knows exactly when the market's going to shift, but no one can really deny that a shift is coming. My guesses are educated, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everything that I predict is going to come to pass.
Sure. Yeah. So what made you want to do the episode then, create the episode?
Well, I just got back from Kentucky.
Okay.
And I was doing a Prideful Goat tasting, and one of the podcast viewers came in, and then this other gentleman walked up, and he's like, "Hey, what are y'all doing?" And I'm like, "I have a podcast, we're drinking my whiskey, blah, blah, blah." And the guy goes, "Oh, I love whiskey, can I try it?" And we ended up getting into a conversation, and it turns out that he is a VP at a bank that provides financing for some of the distilleries, and they actually hold on to the barrels as collateral against the loan.
Okay.
And so given that, I told him that we source barrels, he wanted to know whether or not I thought there was a downturn in the market coming for barrel values, because he was trying to evaluate risk for his bank.
Sure.
And this got me to thinking that maybe consumers would be interested in some of these predictions and what was going to happen to the market if there was an actual downturn. So
what factors are you taking into consideration when you're, trying to educate about the subject?
Well, this is not necessarily something that all consumers know, but some whiskey brands don't make their own whiskey, but instead they purchase barrels from other producers.
Sure.
And the market kind of determines how much consumers are willing to pay for bottles, right? So you can't pay any old thing that you want for a barrel.
Sure.
Because it's going to influence your input costs, and that's going to influence how much you sell it for. And there's factors to consider when you're buying barrels, like angel share loss, and the cost of storage and perceived market value of the liquid inside based on age. And those are all large contributing factors to the value and the number of years that it's been aging inside the barrel. So legacy distilleries enjoy an economics of scale that small manufacturers just don't have. And so they can produce whiskey at a much lower cost than somebody who sources their whiskey.
Okay.
And when a brand is sourcing, they have to pay the distilling producer the amount of money that they require to let go of that whiskey, as opposed to keeping it and selling it themselves, right? Okay. And so that naturally causes the barrels to sell for a lot more money than they actually cost to produce. And so those legacy distilleries, they have a much lower input cost than an individual that's buying barrels from somebody else, because of that profit margin that the producing distillery wants to make. And there's often a secondary cost of acquiring the barrels, because there's often an entity called a barrel broker involved. And they're kind of like a real estate agent for whiskey barrels.
Okay.
They get contacted by the company that has excess barrels that they want to sell, and they have a database of potential customers, and they advertise those barrels, but they actually end up making their profit off of increasing the cost of each barrel, right? And so that also adds to the cost, right? Okay. Pre-COVID, most people believed that the upper limit for a bottle would be somewhere around $10 per year of age. But due to inflation, that number's kind of gone up to about $12 per year of age. And, this is a very rough number, and I'm giving you general estimates, but you can figure out roughly what a bottle is going to cost on the shelves by doing this calculation with the barrel cost.
Okay.
And so you can take the cost of the barrel and divide by $460 and then multiply that number by $12. So as an example, if somebody tried to sell me a barrel for $4,600, I divide by 460, that gives me 10. 10 times $12 would mean that that bottle will land on the shelf somewhere around $120. Now, if that number is less than $12 per year of age, then you might be able to buy that barrel and make profit off of it. But if it's less than $12 per year of age, then you might be paying an amount for the barrel that would cause you to end up having to lose money to liquidate that product. So that's kind of the financial considerations, and that's the market that we're dealing with as we analyze this issue.
Okay. Well, we have like 700 bottles of whiskey and 2 whiskey brands. So how do you think everyone's going to be affected in this equation?
Many non-legacy brands have popped up like ours during the bourbon boom, and depending on how they're positioned, a shift in the barrel market may or may not have a huge impact on them.
Okay.
And that's because of the different ways that people get access to their liquid. So sourcing is generally when you are buying barrels from another distillery that are already aged. And in those instances, you usually don't have any input on how the whiskey is made, right? Like you don't pick the mash bill, you don't pick the yeast strain. It's usually a product that they were making for themselves, but they have excess capacity, so they're gonna sell some of it off. Or it's their business model to make standard whiskeys and they sell them to whoever wants to buy those whiskeys. And because it's already aged, you pay a premium for those barrels, and that's going to influence the price after bottled and what it goes to the public for. Sourcing is actually the quickest path to market because you can buy something that you could sell immediately, right? As soon as you get the barrel, you can immediately dump it and start selling it. And a lot of small businesses are bootstrapped and they don't have a ton of capital to operate for a long time without any revenue. And so this is a very common path for individuals to take to try and get a business started. And pricing for source barrels is determined by the market. And these prices have skyrocketed over the last few years, resulting in individuals releasing bottles of whiskey at prices that I don't think are sustainable.
Sure.
And one of the things I'm very cautious of is when a product is non-age stated, right? And so if you have a non-age stated product that's $100 or $200, you're like, I feel like you might be trying to sell me something that isn't necessarily a good value.
Yeah.
The other way that they can get their barrels is through contract distilling, and that's basically where you hire another producer to make your whiskey for you. You might have influence on the mash bill, you might have influence on other manufacturing processes, and the company that's making the whiskey, they never really own the whiskey. You owned it the entire time, even when they're storing it for you, which is a very common practice, especially if you're a non-distiller producer that's outside of Kentucky and you're hiring a company to make your whiskey in Kentucky. It has to be aged there a year and a day before you can call it Kentucky whiskey. So it's very common for someone to pay someone else to make the whiskey and then it stays there with them. And then the usual suspects for contract distilling in Kentucky especially are Bardstown Bourbon Company and Castle and Key. Both of those businesses were started with additional capacity in mind so that in the beginning they could make whiskey for other brands, and that would cash flow their operations while they were building their own brand lines. And then outside of Kentucky, you've got MGP is the largest producer in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, and they're now known as Ross and Squibb. And then there's another huge player that's in Tennessee called Tennessee Distilling Group. And they are super secretive and they make everyone sign an NDA and no one's allowed to say that they exist. And it's silly, silly, silly. And if you're at TDG, you need to change your policy because everyone thinks that your whiskey is Dickel and your customers are having to sell their whiskey for less money than they would have if people knew that there was another distillery out there making whiskey. So I'll get off my soapbox. By the way, we did have an interview scheduled with one of the founders.
Oh, wow.
And they were going to let us tell the TDG story. And then the other founder said, no, we're too private. We don't want that. And they canceled the interview. Wow. So there are other smaller producers out there, but those are the usual suspects. And the last time I looked, if you wanted to go to one of these big distillers and ask them to make whiskey for you on a contract basis, that 1,000 barrel minimum. and the cost per barrel was $850. So you were signing up to spend $850,000 up front. And then after 4+ years of aging, you should expect that your barrels would be around $1,200 total cost, right? Because you have to pay for storage and taxes and insurance and transportation fees and all of that stuff. And so, as you can see, even if you are contract distilling, you could very easily spend $1.2 million just doing one distillation run. And then, you know, do the math, right? Because you assume that you're going to sell that whiskey and you don't want to run out. So the next year you got to do it again, but you assume your brand's going to grow. And so you have to do more than 1,000 barrels the next year. And then you have to do it again year 3 and year 4. And you're probably not going to release anything until you're in year 4 or 5. And at that point, you're already $5-6 million invested just in barrels, right? And so it is very expensive to do contract distillation. And that's something that causes me to have a little bit of additional respect for a producer when they contract distill, because it is such a huge financial commitment. And it's part of the thing that made me love Brothers Bond.
I love them.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Oh, I'm testing my new whiskey glass that I had designed.
Why?
Well, there's a company out there that's a real Karen. And she threatened to sue us.
Really? You don't say.
Yeah, so we had been producing some traditional tulip-shaped whiskey glasses.
Oh, yes.
We never used the name.
Right, of course.
But they claimed to own the shape of the glass. And since I'm just a little guy, I couldn't fight.
Right.
But do you know what that motivated us to do, Wes?
What?
To go out and design a glass that was actually made for high-proof American spirits. So the company that had the problem with us, their glass was originally designed for low-proof Scotch whiskey.
Oh, okay.
80, 86 proof, that type of thing. And you know what I had noticed? Every time I would nose a really high-proof, high-quality spirit in the United States out of this glass, all I got was ethanol burn.
Yeah, a little burn there. I felt that.
And so we went out and we designed this glass that's actually designed for those higher proof spirits. And I'm so confident in this glass that if anybody were to go to our website and buy one, I'm offering a money-back guarantee.
Wow.
If you get that glass to your house and you find yourself one of these traditional tulip-shaped glasses and you nose a high-proof spirit side by side and you can't tell the difference, I will gladly give you your money back.
So what you're saying is they can really stick it to the Karen and support the little guy by going to bourbonrealtalk.com and ordering one of these with absolutely no risk. They could get their money back if they don't prefer it nosing it to the other?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And if you love small business and you like sticking it to Karens, that's the way to go.
Stick it to Karen. bourbonrealtalk.com.
Cheers. The third way that small companies get their liquid is they make it themselves. So they actually have to buy all their own distillery equipment. And there have been countless new distilleries that have opened up in the last 10 years, most of which decided to make their whiskey on a pot still because of the exorbitant cost of getting started with a column still. But it makes their whiskey very different from traditional Kentucky whiskey, and their cost of production for a barrel is a lot higher than the legacy distilleries. So the legacy distilleries, from what I understand, can produce a barrel of whiskey at around $300 or $350, including the barrel and all the grain input, all of that stuff. But a lot of smaller producers using a pot still tell me that their cost per barrel is around $850. And the whiskey is, quite honestly, probably not worth this much on the open market because it does have a non-traditional flavor. So.
Well, what is it that you've seen that makes you think that the shift in the market is coming?
Well, starting around 2016, we started seeing investment groups that are sending out investment prospectus, trying to get whiskey enthusiasts to pool their money together to do contract distillation runs, right? And so usually they were raising $1.1 or $1.2 million, and they'd say, okay, we're gonna distill 1,000 barrels and we're gonna hold it until it's 4 years old. And if you look at the historical market results for this, you're gonna make an astronomical amount of money if you join this investment group. And I'm still seeing those advertisements today, even though there's some signs that the barrel market's starting to shift, or at least there might be a downturn coming. So at the same time that these investment groups are coming in and having whiskey made, you also had a lot of non-distiller producers enter the market that were creating a significant demand for those very same barrels, right? And then you had the huge success stories like Smooth Ambler and Blonde Brothers and Kentucky Owl and others that emboldened more individuals to even get in the market. And so the market started to experience a barrel shortage, especially of the high age barrels that the market was craving. And pricing started to increase significantly to the point that we're starting to see a lot of non-age stated NDP bottles that are priced far above the $12 per year of age. And as I mentioned, I don't think that's sustainable. And people would love to believe that the reason for the barrel shortage is just the increase in demand from these new NDPs. But the reality is part of the problem was that inventory that could have been used for the non-distiller producers was pulled out of circulation by these investment groups, right? And now these investment groups have all of this shadow inventory that's sitting out there, and we don't know how much of it there is because we don't know how many of them actually did these distillation runs. There's no public records for this, right? And they might be aging at all of these different facilities, but the individuals that technically own those barrels have no choice but to liquidate them to a brand like the Prideful Goat because they don't even have a license to put it in a bottle, right? So they own these barrels, and this is what it is the main contributing factor for me believing that we do have a downturn in the barrel market coming because of what I refer to as shadow inventory. At the same time we're building up the shadow inventory, all of the legacy distilleries were also increasing their capacity to meet their future demand, right? And so they did that sometimes by increasing shift work or reducing the amount of time that the distillery is shut down for cleaning. And then some of the facilities actually increase capacity by bringing in new capital, building new stills, building new storage facilities, and all of that stuff. And at some point, all of this inventory is going to create a tidal wave of aged whiskey that's going to be headed towards the market. And I don't think that there's going to be enough buyers for all of that whiskey.
So if all of this is true, what do you think is going to happen to the whiskey market?
I predict that most of the legacy distilleries are going to be just fine. They may have to cut margins, but with their low production costs, they'll be able to profitably operate and work their way through the inventory that they have. I predict that brands that contract distill whiskey will have a higher success rate than those that exclusively relied on the source market. And this is because the initial cost that they invested in the barrel plus the carry cost will result in a cost per barrel that's still low enough to liquidate the whiskey to price that the market can accept, and they'll still be profitable. But I predict that those underfunded non-distiller producers that source and those that overbought when the barrel market were high, that those will be the individuals that are at the most risk because they have too much capital invested in a whiskey, and if the barrel prices do start to come down, they won't be able to ride the wave down to lower their prices without actually losing money.
Sure.
And so there will be some in that category that are well funded enough that they can ride the wave and they can lose money until they recover. But I believe that there will be a lot of people who source their barrels either because they're poorly funded and prices are coming down and they've got overhead costs that they can't cover because they're not doing a high enough volume at the lower profit margins, or because they have too much money invested in whiskey that they now have to sell at a loss. I think that that's going to be the category that is probably wiped out the most. And then we need to talk about the craft producers that were making their own whiskey. I would say that those that have gotten a large market penetration and they have a huge customer base, that they're probably more likely to do better than others. And anybody who's lowered their production cost and their financing cost, because individuals that are heavily leveraged, that have a lot of debt service and all of that stuff, I think that they might be in trouble. But those that got investments from some of the larger, institutions that are inside the industry, I think that those individuals will probably be able to ride the wave. And my concern is that those that went very heavy in production and all of this new whiskey's coming on the market, aged whiskey from legacy distilleries that tastes more traditional, that they won't be able to sell enough of their whiskey, and they're holding on to all of these barrels that they have money invested in. And then if they go to sell those barrels on the secondary market, no one's going to want them because it doesn't taste like the traditional Kentucky whiskey, right? Keep in mind that pricing and advertising can only have a small influence on how much alcohol humans consume.
Okay.
Right? Like if you look at the whole global consumption, people are going to drink a certain amount of whiskey. And so one of the things that we've seen in the past and I expect to see in the future, and another prediction that I'll make, is that there's going to be a rush to foreign markets. And everyone's going to start trying to sell their whiskey overseas. The problem with that is that those people, you're not going to find new drinkers that were not already buying baijiu or some other alcoholic beverage, and you're going to have to convince them to switch off of what they were currently drinking onto your product. And I don't know that that's going to be enough to actually, save the individuals that are on the fringes that are the most vulnerable in this situation. I also think that those companies that are successful at going overseas are going to have to operate at a lower margin because they're going to have to pay import fees and additional taxes and all that stuff. And I think that those companies that can afford to do that are more than likely going to lower their price here in the United States because they'll figure we're already selling this whiskey for this low margin overseas. Why wouldn't we do it here and take more market share here? And that will put additional pressure on the companies that stayed just U.S. only, and it'll make it that much more difficult. So any producer that can't adjust to the changing market due to some financial constraint will likely become a casualty of the market.
Okay, so our brand Unallocated is a smaller brand that doesn't rely on distribution and the general market to sell. But how do you think that the Prideful Goat will deal with the market? And I mean, brands like the Prideful Goat that are not distiller producers, how do you think that will be affected?
Well, TPG is mostly owned by Giant Texas Distillers, which is owned by an individual who is one of the largest operators in the coffee space. I asked him one time how much of the coffee in the U.S. he touches before it reaches a consumer's hands, and he said 30 to 40%. So you do the math in your own head. We are very well funded, and we're also run by intelligent people who understand the market. So we have not overbought. Right?
Sure.
We have been able to buy the barrels that we needed when we needed them to fulfill our current demand, but we don't have a bunch of costly capital tied up in inventory. And so I'm pretty confident that the Prideful Goat will be able to make its way through whatever downturn happens. And it may actually be a benefit to us in the long run if we're able to start to acquire higher value or higher quality barrels at lower prices at the same time that there's less noise in the market. It might be actually easier for us to generate some additional market share. So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's give away some whiskey.
Let's do it.
So what I was thinking is, since we're talking about sourcing barrels and both of our brands source barrels, maybe we give a sample pack of all of the whiskeys that are out on the table.
I think we should. It's really yummy stuff.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So we're going to do Unallocated Bourbon Batch 1 and 2, and the light whiskey that we released. And then for the Prideful Goat, we're going to do a 15-year, the 8-year rye, and the rum finish rye that I made for Pretty Girl because she loves Angel's Envy.
Thank you. And it is officially sold out.
Oh.
There's
still some in market, but we sold out at the distillery. Yeah. So, yeah. So it's going to be a 6 bottle sample pack for one winner. All you have to do to enter to win is like this video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell so that you're notified of future content, which will also notify you of future giveaways because we do a giveaway in every episode. And you need to go to the video description and fill out the web form. We'll get your basic contact information, run a randomizer, post it publicly, and reach out to you for your shipping details and get your samples absolutely for free. If you want to support this channel, you can go over to our Patreon and check out the member benefits there. We have a lot of great stuff, bonus content, special offers, distillery takeovers, barrel picks, in-person meetups, monthly virtual bottle shares, discounts on merch, and you get the satisfaction of knowing that you support the channel and its mission. And we also have merch.
Lots of great merch. I worked real hard on it.
Yeah. And so Lindsay has spent the last couple of years curating all of our offerings. It's whiskey stuff made for whiskey people, by whiskey people. You can check that out at bourbonrealtalk.com, and every purchase helps keep this show going. And shameless real estate plug, you can also support us by hiring me as your residential real estate agent in the Dallas or Houston metro area. And I will warn you, if you hire me, I give away epic bottles as closing gifts. Yep. If this is the first time you're tuning into the show, we'd love to tell you a little bit about our philosophy. We're all about bringing people together around bourbon, and that's because we lost a loved one to suicide. And as I started to get more involved in the whiskey world and I was looking for ways to try and make a difference in others' lives, I started noticing how whiskey brought people together and helped people form connections that they may not have formed if it hadn't been for that common interest. And those were the types of connections that my brother had started to lose before he took his life. And I thought to myself, maybe if I can get you connected to whiskey, the whiskey will do the rest of the job and get you connected to others. We knew we needed to do that because when we went and looked at some of the other forums out there, we did see a lot of negativity and hate from whiskey trolls online. And now we have a troll-free environment for you to go and interact with other whiskey lovers. But those trolls did teach us another valuable lesson, and that is that if they can hate strangers online, we can love strangers online, because if they can hate, we can love. And that's why we end every episode the same way, and that's this. If you woke up this morning and you're unsure whether or not anyone loved you, just know that we love you. We'll see you next time on Bourbon Real Talk. Cheers. Welcome back to Pretentious Whiskey Reviews. Today, we're evaluating the 1982 Pappy Van Winkle. Ooh. I'm detecting a hint of Bolivian virgin tears and East Indian, no, West Indian grasses.
Y'all, you don't need all that crap. All you need is an American whiskey aroma kit from bourbonrealtalk.com. Developing your palate is a learned skill. Over time, you can train your taste buds without being a douchebag. Get yours today at bourbonrealtalk.com.
I'm also getting Indian nutmeg.